Hello, and welcome to a bonus box of Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I'm Zeckthar, and today I will give chronicling of Fulgrim, primarch of the Emperor's Children, and his corruption and fall from grace. Now I believe we will start on the planet of Lyran, officially designated as 28-3.
Now, this oceanic world was home to a native sentient species known as the Lair, who were reptilian and serpentine in form, but also engaged in extensive genetic engineering to perfect their species, creating a multitude of different castes who were genetically designed to best serve their intended function to the Lair society. Having no land area, the Lair, whose technology equaled or even exceeded that of the Imperium in certain areas, had moved their entire society onto hundreds of floating coral islands that circled a central nexus in the planet's atmosphere. Each coral island was held aloft by an anti-gravity generator. What Fulgrim and his Emperor's Children Legion did not know was that the Lair were also an entire civilization that had been corrupted by Slaanesh, the chaos god of pleasure and pain. The central nexus point that all of their coral islands orbited was actually a massive temple dedicated to the Prince of Pleasure, at the heart of which lay a potent chaos artifact, a beautifully crafted, single-edged demon blade that served as a physical vessel for a greater demon of the Prince of Chaos. The Lair showed all signs of what later generations of the Imperium would recognize as Slaaneshi corruption, including a need for constant extreme sensory inputs, such as riotous colors and constant sounds, and the deriving of pleasure from only the most extreme of sensations, including their own deaths. Completely unaware of the real danger he and his Astarte legions faced on the chaos-corrupted world, Fulgrim ordered the Emperor's Children and the other forces of the 28th Expedition Fleet to assault the planet and conquer it for the Imperium within a single Terran month, completely eradicating the Lair species in the process. During the final slaughter of the Serpentine Xenos race, Fulgrim and his Astartes discovered the great temple dedicated to Slaanesh that lay on the central floating coral island of the Lyrian. The Imperium, ignorant of the existence of the Chaos powers at this time, and holding to the extreme rationalism and atheism of the Imperial truth, did not realize the significance of such a find or what they had really discovered. The expedition led by Fulgrim began to be unwittingly corrupted by the temple's potent and malign influences. After defeating the temple's fanatical Lair defenders, Fulgrim discovered what the Lair were so fiercely protecting. At the center of the chamber of the unholy temple was a circular block of a veined black stone, and embedded within was a tall silver sword with a gently curved blade and a crude amethyst gem set in the pommel. This sword was not only a potent Slaaneshi artifact, but also a physical vessel of the greater demon of Slaanesh. Once Fulgrim had claimed this blade as his own, the demon within began whispering in his mind and corrupting his soul towards the service of Slaanesh. He began to wield the demon blade more often than his prior weapons, the great sword Fireblade that had been forged for him on Terra by his fellow Primarch and most favored brother, Ferrus Manus. Thinking the whispers in his mind were only his own subconscious speaking to him, Fulgrim began listening to what it offered. Eventually, he discovered that these were actually the whispers of a demon that existed within the blade. After a lot of persuasion from his brother Horus, already corrupted by the ruinous powers after his injury on the moon of Divin, Fulgrim gave himself over to chaos, and found his particular patron in the Prince of Pleasure, who offered the Primarch a route to ultimate perfection he so craved for himself and his Astartes, free of all morality and dependent upon the pursuit of ultimate self-obsession. Now I must stop for a moment and simply state, here's where the true downfall of Fulgrim exists. While bettering oneself is an admirable cause, if one forgets those around them and becomes solely self-centered, then they are lost to corruption. Also, the simple fact that perfection is truly and wholly unobtainable. Yet if you think you can grasp it, you will do anything to get it, no matter the cause. Like I said, this is Fulgrim's downfall. He simply cannot and will not be denied perfection. Slaanesh offered him such a prize. Yet as we know, the Chaos Gods lie, as they laugh at mortals' absurdities. Regardless, we must move on. Fulgrim's respect for Horus allowed chaos to find its own way into Fulgrim's heart, destroying Fulgrim's once rock-solid loyalty to the Emperor, and replacing it with a burning desire to destroy the man who he now believed held humanity back from the perfection Fulgrim so craved, and that Horus convinced him only the Chaos Gods could truly provide. Only when mankind had fully embraced chaos could it know true perfection. Fulgrim came to believe this, and the Emperor and his false imperial truth stood directly in the way of his and the rest of humanity's attainment of that perfection. Fulgrim was next ordered by Horus to meet with Ferrus Manus, the primarch of the Iron Hands Legion and Fulgrim's greatest friend amongst his brother primarchs, aboard his flagship, the battle barge Fist of Iron, in the hope that he could be swayed to the side of Horus and the other traitor legions who now served chaos. Fulgrim had sent the bulk of his legion and the 28th Expeditionary Fleet on to meet Horus's own 63rd Expeditionary Fleet in the Estevan system, while he and a small force aided the Iron Hands' 52nd Fleet in their retaking of the world of Kalendis IV from the Orcs. Great bonds of friendship and brotherhood had long existed between them, and Fulgrim felt that he could convince Ferrus of the righteous cause of Horus. Yet Fulgrim's hope proved disastrously wrong, and the meeting of the two primarchs in Ferrus's private inner sanctum in the flagship did not go well, as Ferrus was outraged that his brother would dare contemplate turning against their father, the Emperor. The meeting ended in violence, as the Gorgon made his difference of opinion over continued loyalty to the Emperor known to the Phoenician with his weapons, and he was determined to stop Fulgrim's betrayal of the Imperium before it even began. Ferrus used his silvery necrodermis hands to destroy Fulgrim's power sword Fireblade, but the explosion knocked him out. Fulgrim intended to kill his brother with his own weapon, the Warhammer Forgebreaker, but proved unable to kill his oldest friend, despite the promptings of the Slaaneshi demon that now throttled his soul. When Fulgrim emerged from Ferrus's inner sanctum, he gave the signal to his Phoenix Guard, who instantly beheaded all of the Iron Hands' Malorc Terminators, who served as Ferrus Manus' bodyguard with their power halberds. Fulgrim then successfully fled the Iron Hands Expeditionary Fleet in his personal assault craft, the Firebird, when he ordered his flagship, the battle barge Pride of the Emperor, and its escorts to open fire upon the ships of the 52nd Expeditionary Fleet. This surprise attack crippled them and provided a distraction while Fulgrim and the forces of the 3rd Legion fled into the warp to rendezvous with the rest of the 28th Expeditionary Fleet in the Estevan system. With their allegiance now settled and their path forward determined, the chaos corruption of the Emperor's children spread quickly through the 3rd Legion. From Fulgrim to his chief lieutenants, the 2 Lord Commanders of the Legion, and then its company captains and squad sergeants, and finally to all but the small minority of Emperor's children Astartes, who follow the dictates of Slaanesh rather than remaining loyal to the Emperor. The 3rd Legion's quest for excellence and perfection had been corrupted into the desire to achieve perfect hedonism and constant self-absorbed sensual excess. Now, I would normally, to keep time down, just skip forward to when Fulgrim became a demon prince, and we will get there. But I could not tell the story of Fulgrim without telling how he slew his favorite brother and best friend, Ferrus Manus. The event took place on Estevan V, during the drop site massacre, just before the Great Betrayal. Ferrus Manus and his Morlock Terminators charged through the shattered ruins of the defenses, his black armor and their burnished plates scarred and stained with the blood of enemies. Fulgrim's fixed smile faltered as he truly appreciated the depths of hatred his brother held for him, and wondered again how they had come to this point, knowing that any chance for brotherhood was lost. Only death would end their rivalry. The iron hands pushed through the defenses, the bulky Terminators unstoppable in their relentless advance. Lightning crackled from their claws of their gauntlets, and their red eyes shone with anger. The Phoenix Guard braced themselves to meet their charge, fully aware of the power of such mighty suits of armor, and answered with a terrible war cry. They leapt to meet the Morlocks in a searing clash of blades. Electric fire leapt from the golden edges of the halberds and the lightning claws of the warriors, and a storm of light and sound flared from each life and death struggle. The battle engulfed the Primarch of the Emperor's children, yet he stood above it, awaiting the dark-armored giant, who strode untouched through the lightning-shot carnage as brothers hacked at one another in hatred. Ferrus had long dreamt of this moment of reckoning, ever since Fulgrim had come to him with betrayal in his heart. Only one of them would walk away from this final confrontation. Ferrus taunted Fulgrim for his betrayal of the Emperor and siding with the traitor Horus. He thought his brother mad, for the War Master was defeated, his forces routed, and the power of another 4 legions would soon be brought to bear to crush their attempt at rebellion utterly. Unable to contain himself any longer, Fulgrim shook his head, savoring the final act of betrayal to come, revealing to Ferrus that it was he who was so naive. Horus would never be so foolish enough to be trapped like this. He pointed out towards the northern edge of the Urgal Depression, so that Ferrus could see that it was he and his fellow loyalists who were undone. Ferrus looked up and saw a force larger than that which had begun the assault during the first wave of attack mustered on the landing zone, armed and ready for battle. Dragging their wounded and dead behind them, Quarks and Vulcan led their forces back to the drop site to regroup and to allow the warriors of their recently arrived brother Primarchs of the second wave a measure of the glory in defeating Horus. Though they voxed hails requesting medical aid and supply, the line of Astartes atop the northern ridge remained grimly silent as the exhausted warriors of the Raven Guard and Salamanders came to within 100 meters of their allies. Then, when Horus gave the signal, the fire of betrayal roared from the barrels of 1,000 guns, as the second wave of Astartes revealed where their true loyalties lay. Ferrus looked on in stunned horror, as his apparent allies opened fire upon the Salamanders and Raven Guard, killing hundreds in the fury of their first moments, hundreds more in the second that followed, and volley after volley of bolted fire and missiles skied through the unsuspecting ranks. Even as terrifying carnage was being wreaked upon the loyalists below, the retreating forces of the War Master turned and brought their weapons to bear on the enemy warriors within their midst. Hundreds of the sons of Horus and the Death Guard fell upon the veteran companies of the Iron Hands, and though the warriors of the 10th Legion continued to fight gallantly, they were hopelessly outnumbered and would soon be hacked to pieces. Ferrus Manus turned to face Fulgrim, his teeth bared with the volcanic fury of his own world. The 2 Primarchs leapt at one another, Ferrus wielding a reforged fire blade, and Fulgrim holding Forge Breaker. Their weapons had been forged in brotherhood, but were now wielded in vengeance, meeting in a blazing plume of energy. The 2 Primarchs traded blows with their monstrously powerful weapons, Ferrus Manus wielding his flaming blade and fiery slashes, his every blow defeated by the ebony-hafted hammer he had borne in countless campaigns. Both warriors fought with the hatred only brothers divided could muster, their armor dented, torn, and blackened by their fury. The 2 Primarchs traded terrible blows, wounding one another deeply during their fierce struggle. The battle came to an head, though, when Ferrus tried to dodge a strike of his brother, ducking low and lashing out with his sword at Fulgrim's left leg. Fulgrim was still able to give the Gorgon a glancing blow to his shoulder, knocking the Primarch from his feet. He was still taken to his knees by the tricky strike from Ferrus. As Ferrus pushed himself to his feet and staggered towards the wounded Fulgrim, he cried out as he brought the flaming blade towards his brother's neck. But Fulgrim lashed out as he drew the single-edged, demonically possessed sword he had taken from the Laer temple and blocked the descending weapon. With the power of chaos streaming from the blade, diabolical strength flooded Fulgrim's limbs as he pushed against the power of Ferrus Manus, feeling his brother's surprise at his resistance. Fulgrim managed to surge to his feet and lash out, his silver blade biting deep into the breastplate of Ferrus Manus. And the Primarch of the Iron Hands cried out, falling to his knees once again. Fireblade slid from his grasp as he gasped in a fierce agony. As Fulgrim raised the silver sword in preparation of delivering the death blow to Ferrus Manus, he found that he could not do it. In an instant, he saw what he had become, and what monstrous betrayal he had allowed himself to be party to. He knew in that single moment that he had made a terrible mistake in drawing the sword from the Temple of Lair, and he fought to release the damnable blade that he brought him so low. Yet, his grip was locked onto the weapon, and even as he recognized how far he had fallen, he knew that he had come too far to stop. The realization, coupled with the knowledge that everything he had striven for had been a lie. As though moving in slow motion, Fulgrim saw Ferrus Manus reaching for his fallen sword, his fingers closing around the wire-wound grip, the flames leaping once more to the blade as its creator's touch. Fulgrim's blade seemed to move with a life of its own, as he swung the blade of his own volition. Fulgrim tried desperately to pull the blow, yet his muscles were no longer his own to control. The demonic blade sliced through the genetically enhanced flesh and bone of one of the Emperor's sons. The Iron Hands Primarch collapsed to the ground. His head rolled free from his body, decapitated. Ferrus Manus was dead by his brother's own hand. Though Fulgrim had proved the victor, he discovered as he looked down at his brother's battered body that everything up until this moment had been a lie. Fulgrim, as if awakened from a long sleep, was shocked by the death of Ferrus, into thinking clearly about the situation for the first time since his expedition to Larian. And he was horrified by what he had done, and by the many betrayals that had led brother Astartes to slay one another. Overcome with grief, he succumbed to a moment of weakness and foolishness, agreeing to the demon's whispering, suggesting that he could find release in the oblivion. The greater demon was then freed from the prison of the sword and fully possessed Fulgrim's body, claiming it for its own, trapping the real Fulgrim's consciousness away within a psychic prison formed within his own mind, but symbolically represented by the painting of the Primarch that stood in the place of honor in La Finance, the theater of the Third Legion's flagship, the pride of the Emperor. 4 days after the drop site massacre on Estevan V, Horus Lupercal assembled those Primarchs who stood in opposition to the Imperium aboard his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. They all knew the cost of the coming campaign and their destinies within it. The traitor fleets were underway, but after the unpleasantness of Estevan, this was the first time they had gathered as a full fraternity. 8 Primarchs were present, though only half of them were physically in the room where the gathering took place. This included Fulgrim, Perturbo, Angron, and Lorgar. The absent 4 were nothing more than holographic projections. 3 of them, Conrad Kurz, Mortarion, and Alfarius, manifested around the table in the forms of the flickering gray holograms. The last of them appeared as a brighter image comprised of the silver radiance of brilliant witchfire. This last image was of Magnus the Red, who projected himself from afar by sorcerous means, from the sorcerer's planet, where he was still licking his wounds from the recent burning of Prospero, led by Lehman Russ's Space Wolves. As soon as Lorgar had taken his seat at the council table, he could not take his eyes off his brother Fulgrim. The War Master grew ever more weary of his brother's inability to adhere to the established planning and his lack of attention to the important gathering. Before the meeting could properly get underway, Lorgar slowly reached for the ornate Croesus mace on his back. As he drew the weapon, in the company of his closest kin, his eyes remained locked on one of them, and all physically present felt the deepening chill of psychic frost rimming from their armor. The word-bearer Primarch accused the thing that mimicked his brother in physical appearance as not being who he supposedly was supposed to be. Before anyone could react, Lorgar's Croesus struck the supposed Emperor's children primarch. Fulgrim crashed into the back wall. His prostrate form crumpled to the ground. Turning his fierce eyes upon his other brothers, he declared that this pretender
was not Fulgrim.
The other primarchs that were present advanced upon the changeling, drawing their own weapons. The War Master tried to placate the enraged Lorgar. His merest threat of confrontation had usually been enough to quell Lorgar from any rash actions in the past. But as they faced Aurelian now, even Horus was wide-eyed in the changes wrought within him since Estevan V. Clutching his mace in his crimson-colored gauntlets, defying his brothers, he warned them to stay back. When Horus once again attempted to calm the enraged Primarch, Lorgar was surprised at the sudden realization that the War Master already knew that Fulgrim was not whom he pretended to be. The War Master informed his fellow Primarchs that he would personally deal with the situation and dismiss them from his chambers, with the exception of Lorgar. The Word-Bearer Primarch could see the truth. This creature was one of the demons of chaos, as whatever was wearing his brother's skin and armor had its soul hollowed out. Something nestled within, puppeteering the soulless body of his own brother. What Lorgar couldn't understand was how this had come to pass, and why did Horus continue to protect such a dark secret? Horus explained to his brother that he had not orchestrated Fulgrim's demise. He was merely containing the aftermath. Lorgar was perturbed that another sentience now rode within Fulgrim's body. Horus was annoyed at his brother's line of questioning, for Lorgar and Fulgrim had never been really close. Why did it matter to him? Lorgar explained that it mattered because this vile intrusion was a perversion of the natural order. There was no harmony in such a joining, not like his own blessed demon-possessed sons, the Gal of Vorbak. A living soul that had been annihilated for its mortal shell to simply house a greedy, unborn wretch of a demon. During Lorgar's pilgrimage to the Eye of Terror years earlier, he had walked in the warp itself. He had stood where the gods and mortals had met. Lorgar knew this form of possession was weakness and corruption, a perversion of what the Chaos Gods wished for mankind. The ruinous powers wanted allies and willing followers, not soulless husks ridden by their demons. Using his powerful psychic abilities, Lorgar held the demon at bay. The War Master cautioned that he was killing Fulgrim, but Lorgar replied that it was not their brother but an it, one that he could destroy if he so wished. Lorgar threatened the demon that he would learn its true name and banish it back into the warp. The demon Fulgrim was helpless against Lorgar's formidable psychic abilities, as the War Master attempted to restrain his brother by placing his hand on Lorgar's shoulder. The Primarch psychically commanded Horus to remove his hand. Unable to resist, Horus obeyed. His fingers shivered as they withdrew, and his gray eyes flickered with tension. As the enraged Lorgar strode away from the council chambers, Horus commented that his brother had changed since crossing blades with Korax on the surface of Estevan V. Lorgar replied that everything had changed that night, and then he took his leave and returned to his ship, contemplating what he had perceived as utter foulness. Now, those that served the Third Legion had no idea that their beloved leader was clawing ineffectively at the bondage of his own mind in which he was held. Only the swordsman, Captain Lucius, of the 13th Company, had appeared to realize that something was amiss with Fulgrim, but even he had said nothing. The demon Fulgrim had sensed the burgeoning warp touch upon the warrior, and presented him with the silver demon blade within which the Lair had bound the fragment of its essence, as he now wielded the far more potent Cunbrach Anethim, a gift from Horus. Though the Lair demon sword was now bereft of its spirit, there was still power within the blade, power that would empower Lucius in the years of death to come. Now, even though Lucius enjoyed the Primarch's gift, he continued to contemplate upon the apparent changes in his lord. Sensing something was afoot, Lucius was investigating further after receiving a series of dark dreams concerning the paintings of the Primarch that hung in the Lie Furnace. Already concerned by his lord's erratic behavior and strange moods, Lucius proceeded to scrutinize the Primarch's every move. His concerns grew even more when he noticed Fulgrim's lack of brotherly camaraderie and observance of the Legion's rituals and traditions. But what truly aroused Lucius's suspicion was the realization that Fulgrim's swordsmanship was suddenly inferior to his own superlative skills. His primarch was not one who he appeared to be. His suspicions were further confirmed when he witnessed Fulgrim employing powerful psychic abilities in open combat against Warhound-class Titans of the Mechanicum during the 3rd Legion's assault on Prismatica 5. Lucius continued to receive the strange dreams in his sleep, began to follow the threads implanted by these prescient visions. Breaking a standing order, Lucius defied the Primarch and went to investigate La Finesse, the theater located aboard the Emperor's Children's flagship, the Pride of the Emperor. Even in the dying light, the portrait's magnificence was palpable. A glorious golden frame held the canvas trapped within its embrace. The wondrous perfection of the painting was truly breathtaking. Clad in his wondrous armor of purple and gold, Fulgrim was betrayed before the great gates of the Helepolis, the heart of the flagship, the flaming wings of the great phoenix sweeping up behind him. The firelight of the legendary bird shone upon his armor, each polished plate seeming to shimmer within the heat of the fire, his hair a cascade of gold. The Primarch of the Emperor's Children was lovingly portrayed in perfect detail. Every nuance of his grandeur and the life that made Fulgrim such a vision of beauty captured in an exquisite brushwork. No finer figure of a warrior had ever existed or ever would again. And to even glimpse such a flawless example of the painter's art was to know that wonders still exist in the galaxy. Gazing at the eyes of the painting, Lucius could see the horror within the Primarch's eyes, a horror that had not been rendered by the skill of a mortal painter. The perfect, exquisite agony burned into the portrait's gaze, and the dark pools of the eyes seemed to follow his every movement. Lucius came to the conclusion that somehow his Primarch was trapped within the painting, and that the entity that paraded around as their legion's lord was an impostor. Determined to free his Primarch by any means at his disposal, Lucius secretly convened the Brotherhood of the Phoenix, the exclusive warrior lodge of the 3rd Legion that only allowed warriors of officer rank to join because of the Legion's love of hierarchy. Through his skilled oratory, the swordsman was able to persuade his Mercular brothers that the Primarch was not himself. Shortly after, the Brotherhood of the Phoenix ambushed the Primarch, and despite taking several casualties, managed to subdue their lord and render him unconscious. The Primarch was then taken to the Apothecarian of the 3rd Legion's chief apothecary, Fabius Bile, where he was strapped down to one of the examination tables. Here, Fabius, Lucius, Julius Curasson, and Marius Versurian attempted to drive forth the demonic entity from their lord's mortal shell through the protracted torture sessions known as excruciation. Fulgrim willingly submitted himself to his tormentor's ministrations and continuously spoke of his perceptions of reality, events that were currently taking place in the galaxy as chaos grew in power and the envisioned path for his legion. During the torture session, Lucius suddenly realized that they had been misled. Misinterpreting the situation, they had been duped by their lord. Lucius immediately bent his knee and prostrated himself before his Primarch as Fulgrim easily tore free from his restraints. His fellow conspirators all bowed to their lord and master. Content that his favored sons had learned from the experience, the Primarch did not punish them for their transgressions, for he was not the demon-possessed shell of the Phoenix as he had allowed the Astartes to believe, but he was the man himself. Fulgrim decided to share with Lucius his motives for such an elaborate ruse. He revealed that he had indeed been possessed by a demonic entity for quite some time, an entity that had trapped his disembodied spirit within the great portrait that he had hung in the La Finance. Unwilling to accept his fate, the Primarch had bided his time and used the tormenting experience to learn of the warp craft and the infallible ways of demonkind. He eventually was able to use his newly acquired arcane knowledge to force the demon out of his mortal body, swapping places with the foul entity, and trapping it within the portrait for all time. Presumably, it was the demon that had been sending Lucius these dark dreams in order to attempt to free itself from its prison. In an attempt to further educate his favored champion in the unfathomable ways of chaos, the primarch's apparent inferiority in his sword techniques was merely a ploy to manipulate Lucius into challenging him. The primarch went on to explain that his mercurial moods and the lack of interest in the camaraderie of the Third Legion's rituals were a natural evolution of his nature to achieve perfection along the path laid out by Slaanesh. Fulgrim then announced that he intended to go further than anyone in the realms of sensual experience, intent on pushing the boundaries of reality to the extreme. Fulgrim didn't merely want to accomplish these things for the sole acquisition of power, but to experience the journey, a journey he wanted his gene sons to undertake with him. He explained that he ordered the assault on Promisca 5 was to claim the crystal the Mechanicum had been mining there so that it might be used to erect a wondrous new city of mirrors dedicated to the exploration of sensual pleasure and self-enlightenment through its sensation. But the next stop on the Emperor's children's path towards enlightenment through chaos was to rendezvous with the Primarch Perturbo and his Iron Warriors Legion. Now, while this is all taking place during Horus's rebellion, the Iron Warriors took the time to humble their great enemies, the Imperial Fists, upon the isolated world of Hydra Cordatus that the Sons of Dorn had recently brought into Imperial compliance. Following their victory, word reached Perturbo that Fulgrim and the Emperor's Children's Legion wished to rendezvous with him and discuss something of great import. Though the Phoenician had yet to reveal the true purpose of his visit, he had promised Perturbo that it was wondrous. Perturbo knew that his brother had a flair for the melodramatic, which only seemed to have gotten worse since the Third Legion threw in their lot with the War Master. The Lord of Iron counted none of his fellow Primarchs as close, but the Phoenicians' adherence to perfection in all things had once provided common ground between the two superhuman warriors, and allowed them to talk as trusted comrades in arms, if not beloved brothers. What the Emperor's children had sought with constant movement towards the attainment of perfection, the Iron Warriors earned with rigid discipline and methodical planning, two divergent paths to the same ultimate goal. Perturbo believed Fulgrim's visit had something to do with the inevitable campaign to be conducted against Mars. The War Master needed the Martian theater fully secured before they moved against Terra, and he believed that Fulgrim was there to seek the Iron Warriors' aid in breaking open the forged cities of the Mechanicum. If he was right, Perturbo wanted his legion to have a plan in place to achieve that objective. Until the Iron Warriors received further orders, Perturbo would humor his brother and listen to what Fulgrim had to say. While making plans for the upcoming campaign, Perturbo received word that the Emperor's children had arrived, unannounced, on the surface of Hydra Cordatus. Over 300 drop craft had landed beyond the mouth of the valley where the Iron Warriors had made their encampment. Fulgrim met his brother Primarch in a private inner sanctum of his command bunker with the enticing offer that Perturbo could not refuse, the means to make it so that the Lord of Iron's every desire could be made real, and would never disappoint, never fail to live up to his fondest expectations, and never, ever be eclipsed. Yes, Fulgrim came with an offer to unite their mutual forces in battle on a glorious quest, one that might tip the balance of the War Master's rebellion. Though Perturbo was suspicious of his brother's intentions, perhaps this joint venture would grant understanding through common cause. Fulgrim revealed his purpose, and they were to venture to the warp storm that had plagued Perturbo's dreams all of his life. Within it hidden an ancient and forbidden Xenos weapon, known as the Angel Exterminatus. It had been hidden in the grave of its doom, a weapon of such power that the stars themselves turned upon it rather than allow it to escape its prison. Meanwhile, unknown to both the Emperor's children and the Iron Warriors, they were actually being pursued by a ragtag group of loyalist Astartes, who were the survivors of the drop site massacre on Esteban V, and were determined to stop the traitors at all cost. These loyalist space marines were gathered from the survivors that had fought their way out of the killing ground of the Urgol Depression on Esteban V. They had managed to escape Esteban's systems aboard an Iron Hand strike cruiser known as the Sisyphum. Iron Hand Astartes and their mortal serfs formed the bulk of the warship's crew, but survivor warriors of the Salamanders and a single Raven Guard Astartes were also counted among the number. The months that followed saw the Sisyphum embark on a series of hit-and-run attacks on traitor forces on the northern frontiers of the galaxy, wreaking harm like a lone predator swimming in a very dark ocean. Traitor forces seeking flanking routes through the Segmentum Obscurus were their prey. Scout craft, cartography ships, slow-moving supply hulks heavily laden with immortal troops, ammunition, and weapons. Disruption and harassment were the name of the game, until contact had been established with a desperate group of loyalist forces that had also escaped the massacre, and that a stratagem of sorts was agreed upon. With the 10th Legion too scattered to function in a traditional battlefield role, its surviving commanders found their own way to fight back, as the thorns in the flanks of the Leviathan that distracted it from the sword thrust to the vitals. At Kavor Sarta, an Iron Hand known as Sabak Wayland, and the lone Raven Guard survivor, Nakona Shokine, had captured an unlingual cipher host, one of the so-called Cryptos, a hybrid abomination creature of the Dark Mechanicum that had previously made the Traitors' Code network of cryptographic impossibility to break. With the Cryptos, the Loyalist commanders were finally able to access the Traitors' Code communications, and with this knowledge, the Sisyphum's captain, Ulrach Branthen, had ordered the Sisyphum to make the journey to Hydra Cordatus and the meeting of the traitor primarchs that had been indicted by cracked communications. After learning of Fulgrim's intention to enter the Eye of Terror and recover the Angels Exterminatus, the crew of the Sisyphum made their way towards the Warp Rift, aided by a mysterious Eldar guide, with the intention of thwarting the traitor's plan to acquire the unknown Xenos weapon. Now, back with the traitor Primarchs, the destination of the joint fleet of the Iron Warriors and the Imperial Children's vessels was the lost Eldar world of Idris, a world said to have been favored by the Eldar god Lilith. Idris was one of the legendary Crone worlds, which once formed the heart of the lost Eldar Empire before they were consumed by the creation of the vast warp rift that was the Eye of Terror, following the birth of the Chaos god Slaanesh. The Lost World was located at the heart of the Eye of Terror, somehow remaining in a fixed position, keeping it from destruction in the gravitational hellstorm of a supermassive black hole that lay at the center of the eternal warp storm. It was from the epicenter that the galaxy vomited unnatural matter into the void, a dark doorway to an unknowable destination and an unimaginable powerful singularity whose gravity was so strong that it consumed light, matter, space, and time in its destructive core. The ultimate goal was within the Primarch's grasp, the sepulchre of Aisha's doom, which sat at the center of the citadel of Amon ni Sheikh Khalis. The citadel stood astride the entrance to the prison tomb of the Angel Exterminatus. Before launching a full planetary assault, the Iron Warriors launched a preliminary orbital bombardment around the citadel, a standard practice when preparing to assault a potentially hostile environment. In the wake of the orbital bombardment flocked the Thunderhawks, Stormbirds, Warhawks, and heavy planetary landers launched from crammed embarkment decks. The invasion had begun. The traitors' assault began 5 hours later, despite the full circuit of fortifications still being incomplete. For all intents and purposes, the route to the citadel of Amon ni Sheikh Khalis was undefended and their route unopposed. Ever mistrustful, though, of the lack of defenses, Perturbo had his Iron Warriors dig in. Assuming a perfect formation outside the walls and a layered barbation that protected the traitor legion's line of retreat. Fulgrim's host broke apart into individual warbands, ranging in size from around 100 warriors to groups of nearly 1,000. Each of these autonomous groups appeared to be led by a captain, though such was the bizarre ornamentation and embellishment on each warrior's armor, it was often impossible to discern specific rankings. Leaving the fortified bridgehead behind, Perturbo led his Iron Warriors and the Emperor's Children's contingent into the heart of Amon ni Sheikh Khalis. The sepulchre of Isha's doom was a monumental palace, sprawling with richly ornamented and bulbous morn towers and sweeping ivory-roofed domes. As the column of traders pressed onwards towards the sepulchre, they were being silently and unknowingly observed by the loyalist Astartes of the Sisyphum. Despite being outnumbered 1,000 to 1, the small force of loyalist legionaries devised a mean to find another way into the massive room. Yet, as the two primarchs neared their ultimate goal, Fulgrim kept pressing his stern brother with curt impatience to not linger. Perturbo took the time to study Fulgrim and his assembled host. His brother was sheened in sweat, but it was not perspiration that beaded his brow. Fulgrim was sweating actual light. Though it was faint, it was visible to Perturbo's gene-enhanced sight that saw beyond that even Astartes' eyes were capable of detecting. He wondered if Fulgrim was aware of the radiance bleeding from him, and decided he must be. His brother's armor strained against his body, and his features were drawn and tired, as though only by an effort of will he was still standing. His captains looked no better, like hounds straining at the leash. A number of Fulgrim's Lord Commander's flesh was also suffusing with a light similar to the enveloping Fulgrim, a deathly radiance that had no place within any living being. Perturbo did not trust Fulgrim one bit, knowing that inevitably he would be betrayed by his brother. The Lord of Iron yet still pressed on, intent on bringing their quest to a completion. As they neared their final destination at the heart of the room, the power of the heart of Idris spasmed in hateful recognition of the followers of Slaanesh, known to the Eldar as She Who Thirsts, and awoke its guardians from their slumber. Thousands of crystalline statues threw off their previous immobility. They moved stiffly, like sleepers awoken from eons' long slumber, and the gems at their heart of their bulbous heads bled vibrant colors into glassy bodies that suddenly seemed significantly less frail. This army of wraiths were the Eldar dead of the Idris. Soon both the traitor forces outside the citadel, as well as those inside, were attacked from all sides by the Revenant army. Like automata, but with a hideously organic feel to their movements, the Eldar constructs emerged in their thousands with every passing second. As Perturbo was busy fighting for his life, Fulgrim slipped away in the midst of the fighting. Soon realizing that it was gone, the Lord of Iron stepped into the green glow emanating from the center of the massive chamber. Perturbo understood that this was no elemental energy or mechanical generated motive force, but a distilled essence of all those who had died there. Perturbo then descended downwards on the unending spiral towards the point of the light that grew no brighter, no matter how far he descended. When Perturbo reached the bottom, he found Fulgrim standing at the origin of a slender bridge that arched out to the center of a spherical chamber of incredibly sanity-defying proportions. Idris, it seemed, was a hollow world. Its core, this colossal void, with the impossibly bright sun at its heart. Perturbo confronted his brother, realizing that there was never an angel exterminatus. Fulgrim confirmed for Perturbo that there was no such weapon yet, for he was to be the angel exterminatus. The Iron Warrior, Perturbo, responded that his brother always did have an appetite for rampant narcissism, but this was the grandest illusion yet. Shaking his head, unamused at Fulgrim's explanation, Perturbo took a step towards his brother, forge breaker in his hand, intent on killing him. He was not a very happy person. Perturbo never was. But anyways, I digress. Fulgrim spoke a single word, Its nightmare syllables tore at Perturbo's brain, causing him to stumble and drop to one knee. Fulgrim revealed the reason for his brother being drained of energy. When Fulgrim had arrived on Hydra Cordatus, he had presented the Lord of Iron with a gift, a folded cloak of softest ermine, trimmed with foxbat fur, and embroidered with an endless repeating pattern of spiral and golden proportion. The flattened skull of a chrome steel acted as the fastener. Set in the skull's forehead was a gemstone the size of a fist, black and veined, with hair-fine threads of gold. As they made their way towards the heart of the Eye of Terror, the large gemstone at the center of the skull-carved cloak pin had changed from black to solid gold color and pulsed with its own internal heartbeat. For this was no mere stone. This was a Massacre stone, known as the Harvester, which had slowly been draining Perturbo's strength and life force. With the Lord of Iron's sacrifice, Fulgrim would finally be able to achieve apotheosis. The two primarchs ascended upwards within the shaft of light, emerging into the chaos that was happening within the heart of the sepulchre. The primarch of the Emperor's children hurled his brother aside, and Perturbo fell in a languid arc to land with a crunch of metal and crystal at the edge of the shaft. Blood trailed the air in a streaming red arc from Perturbo's chest. The Lord of Iron lay unmoving, his body broken and lifeless. The attention of every Astartes within the chamber was irrevocably drawn towards the Primarch, for they recognized that an event of great moment was about to happen. The Phoenician was no longer the same being as had descended into the planet. He floated in the air above the shaft, which no longer poured its green torrent up to the restless darkness above, but simply radiated a fading glow of dying light. Fulgrim's armor was shimmering with vitality, as though the light of 1,000 suns were contained within him and strained to break free. The Primarch's dark, doll-like eyes were twin black holes, doorways to heights of experience and sensation, the likes of which could only be dreamed by madmen and those willing to go to any lengths to taste them. Yet, just as Fulgrim was about to achieve his ultimate desire, Perturbo had regained enough of his former strength and rose to his feet, the Massacre stone in his hand. Perturbo walked towards Fulgrim, keeping the hand holding the Massacre stone extended over the shaft in the center of the chamber. Perturbo looked his brother in the eye for some hint of remorse, a sign that he regretted the things that had come to this, something to show he felt even a moment of shame at plotting to murder his brother. He saw nothing, and his heart broke to know that the Fulgrim that he had known long ago was gone, never to return. He had not thought it possible that anyone could plunge so far as to be beyond redemption. Perturbo knew that Fulgrim no longer wanted to be an angel. He wanted to be a god. He informed the Phoenician that mankind had outgrown such things a long time ago. Disgusted by Fulgrim's desires, Perturbo hurled the Massacre stone into the deep shaft. Suddenly, a barrage of bolter fire erupted, and a handful of Imperial children's Astartes were pitched from their feet. Black-armored space marines bearing the mailed fist upon their shoulder guards charged towards the traitors. It was the Astartes of the 10th Legion, the Iron Hands. Soon battle was joined, as loyalists fought traitor within the expansive chamber. The noose of battle was closing on the two Primarchs at its center. Perturbo locked on his knees, and Fulgrim hovering in the air as though bound to his brother by ties not even the call of war could break. The Iron Hands were mired in battle with the Emperor's children and the Iron Warriors, zipping streams of fire blasting back and forth between them. During the battle, one of the loyalist Astartes, the Raven Guard named Sherokin, had acquired the fallen Massacre stone. He instinctively knew that if this stone was desired by Fulgrim, then it had to be destroyed. Taking a bolter from a fallen Emperor's children Astarte, he aimed the muzzle at the strange gold and black stone and pulled the trigger. The weakened Perturbo was renewed by the sudden release of his life force from the chaotic relic. Fulgrim's body arced in sympathetic resonance, For the Magator stone contained more than just the strength stolen from Perturbo by Fulgrim. It contained their mingled essences. A power greater than the sum of its parts. A power to fuel an essence so brutal that only the combined force of two primarchs could achieve it. Armor burned from Fulgrim's body, flaking away like golden dust in a hurricane, leaving his monstrously swollen body naked, and his flesh blazing with furnace heat. Spectral flames of shimmering pink and purple licked around his body, a hungry fire waiting to consume him the moment his focus slipped. As the Lord of Iron finally pushed himself upright and stood fully erect, he lifted Forgebreaker onto his shoulder. Fulgrim saw his death in Perturbo's eyes and grinned, knowing that his brother had to do it. Perturbo hefted Forgebreaker like a headsman at an execution, and swung the mighty hammer in a wide arc, splitting the Phoenician's body wide open. It was done. Fulgrim's body exploded under the impact of Perturbo's warhammer, and the cry of release was a shrieking birth scream. An explosion of pure force ripped from the Phoenician's destroyed flesh, filling the chamber of towers with a blinding light that was too bright to look upon, too radiant to ignore. Like a newborn sun, the wondrous incandescence was the center of all things, a rebirth in fire, new flesh crafted from the ashes of the old. Every eye in the chamber was turned to the light, though it would surely blind them or drive them to madness. Through the slitted fingers and shimmering reflections, the survivors of the fighting bore witness to something magnificent and terrible, an agonizing death and violent birth combined. A figure floated in the midst of the light, and it took a moment for Perturbo to recognize the impossibility of what he was seeing. It was Fulgrim, naked and pristine, his body unsullied by any of the mawkish ornamentations with which he had defaced his flesh, as perfect as the day the Emperor had first conceived him. Fulgrim's back arced, and his bones split with gunshot cracks. His flesh, once so perfect, now ran fluid and malleable, his form molding and remolding as though an invisible sculptor pressed and worked him like clay upon the wheel. Fulgrim's legs extended outward, then they ran and lengthened, fusing together in a writhing serpent tail. The skin thickened and sheening with reptilian scales and segmented plates of chitinous armor. Perturbo took a step towards the thing, being born from the death of his brother, all the while despairing that this was his brother. Perturbo had destroyed Fulgrim's mortal shell. This was an immaterial avatar of light and energy, a soul and desire. What was being done here was an act of will, a creature birthing itself through its own desire to exist. Fulgrim's face was a mask of agonizing rapture, a pain endured for the pleasure it promised. Two obsidian horns erupted from Fulgrim's brow, curling back over his skull, leaving his perfect face as unsullied as the most innocent child. Fulgrim ascended into chaos, a prince of the neverborn, a lord of the ruinous powers, the chosen and beloved champion of Slaanesh. As the newborn demon prince departed, the first of the traitor primarchs to achieve demonic apotheosis, he left his brother with a cryptic message that they would one day meet again, and both brothers would yet renew their bonds. Lifting his hands into the air, a curtain of light rose up from the ground, and Fulgrim and all of his emperor's children marines disappeared in a flare of arcane teleportation energy. With the disappearance of the emperor's children, the crone world of Idris began to tear itself apart. The force at the heart of the world was no more. The strength of the life forces of the dead Eldar that had kept it safe was falling, and soon this planet would be swallowed by the unimaginable forces of the supermassive black hole that lay at the heart of the Eye of Terror. Across the chasm, the remaining Iron Hands gathered up their wounded and fell back from the spreading fissures and heaving ruptures upon the floor. They looked upon Perturbo with hatred, but decided to make their way off-world from the doomed planet. They knew that they could not fight the Lord of Iron and live through the encounter. Perturbo, on the other hand, let the Iron Hands depart. Then he led his warriors out of the crumbled citadel. Once aboard his flagship, the Iron Blood, Perturbo watched the final death throes of the Eldar Crone world. The Iron Blood strained to break orbit, But the force of the heart of the Eye of Terror was reasserting its grip on reality with a vengeance. Many of the smaller vessels of the Iron Warriors survivor fleet that had followed the SSFN had already been dragged within its embrace, swallowed by the black hole's powerful energies. Only the capital ship had engines large enough to resist the inexorable pull, but even they were delaying the inevitable. Perturbo's triarchs stood patiently around their lord, awaiting his orders. The Lord of Iron informed them that he always moved forward, never backwards. They would go into the black hole. Though his senior command believed that this was suicide, the Lord of Iron informed them that Fulgrim had promised that the two brothers would meet again. The Iron Warriors were not meant to die within the Eye, and there was only one way onwards. His men moved to carry out his orders, and the Iron Warriors' fleet plunged into the heart of terror. Fulgrim would later resurface and cause problems for the Empire of Man until Guilliman had had enough of him and tried to hunt him down. If you want to know more about that, I gave a full accounting of it in the short box, The Fall of the Avenging Sun. But what happened to Perturbo? Well, that, my friends, is a story for another time. If you enjoyed this box, please like, subscribe, comment, and follow. And as always,
Until next time, this is Zeckthar, signing off.